There are people in this world who carry secrets so heavy that they forget who they really are. Rohan was one of those people. He worked as a software developer at a small tech startup in San Francisco. And if you met him, you would never guess that he was hiding something. He was the kind of guy who showed up early, finished his work on time, and left without making any noise. Quiet. Invisible. That was how he liked it. The startup was called Lumana. It was a small company with big dreams. They were building an app that used artificial intelligence to teach music to children. The idea was simple but powerful. Kids could learn piano, guitar, or violin through interactive lessons that adjusted to their skill level. The founders believed that every child deserved access to music education, not just the ones whose parents could afford expensive private teachers. Rohan had joined Lumina 2 years ago, not because he cared about the mission, but because he needed a job. At least, that was what he told himself. Deep down, there was another reason. Something about music pulled him in, even though he had tried so hard to push it away. You see, Rohan had a past that nobody at the office knew about. 10 years ago, he was not a developer. He was a pianist. And not just any pianist. He was one of the most talented young musicians in the country. At the age of 21, he had earned a spot at one of the most prestigious music schools in America. Teachers called him gifted. Critics said he had the kind of talent that comes along once in a generation. His future was bright, and everyone expected him to become a star. But then something happened. Something that changed everything. It was the night of his final performance at the school. The auditorium was packed with hundreds of people. Talent scouts, music producers, and famous composers had come to watch him play. This was his moment. The moment he had worked his entire life for. Rohan walked onto the stage, sat down at the grand piano, and placed his fingers on the keys. The spotlight was hot on his face. The silence in the room was so thick, he could feel it pressing against his chest. He took a deep breath and tried to begin, but his hands would not move. It started as a small tremor in his fingers. Then his heart began to race. His vision blurred. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He could hear whispers in the audience. People were waiting, expecting, judging. And still, his hands would not move. After what felt like an eternity, Rohan stood up from the bench, walked off the stage, and never played in public again. The doctors called it severe performance anxiety, a panic attack triggered by the pressure of the moment. They said it was treatable. They said he could recover with therapy and practice. But Rohan did not want to recover. He wanted to forget. So he did what many broken people do. He ran away. He dropped out of music school, moved to a new city, and buried himself in a completely different career. He taught himself to code, got a degree in computer science, and pretended that the pianist inside him had never existed. For 10 years, it worked. He built a new life. A quiet life. A safe life. The piano in his apartment gathered dust in the corner of his living room. He never touched it. He could not even look at it without feeling that familiar tightness in his chest. And then he found himself at Lumina, surrounded by music once again. It was strange how life worked sometimes. No matter how far he ran, the thing he was running from always seemed to find him. But Rohan kept his distance. He wrote code for the back-end systems. He fixed bugs. He attended meetings and nodded along when his colleagues talked about the beauty of music education. He never told anyone that he understood music better than all of them combined. He never mentioned that he could hear the flaws in their audio samples or that their algorithm was missing the emotional depth that made music truly powerful. He stayed invisible. And for a while that was enough. But Lumina was in trouble. Serious trouble. The startup had been trying to raise money for over a year, and every attempt had failed. Investors liked the idea, but they did not love it. They said the product was good, but not great. They said it lacked something special, something that would make people care. The team had heard these words so many times that they had started to believe them. Morale was low. People were tired. Some had already started looking for other jobs. The founder of Lumana was a man named Theo. He was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a beard that had grown messier with each failed pitch. Theo had started this company because he believed in it. He had put his savings, his reputation, and 5 years of his life into building something meaningful. And now he was watching it fall apart. One afternoon, Theo called a meeting in the small conference room. The entire team of 12 people squeezed inside, sitting on chairs, desks, and even the floor. The air was tense. Everyone knew what was coming. Theo stood at the front of the room and spoke slowly. His voice was calm, but there was pain behind it. He told them the truth. The company had 6 weeks of money left. After that, they would have to shut down. Salaries would stop. The dream would be over. The room was silent. A few people looked down at their hands. One woman wiped her eyes. Rohan sat in the back corner, his face expressionless, but inside, he felt something stir. A feeling he had not felt in a long time. That was not just sadness. It was something else. Something that surprised him. It was the urge to help. Theo continued talking. He said there was one last chance. A big technology conference was happening in 6 weeks. The EdTech Innovation Summit. It was the biggest event of the year for education startups. Thousands of investors, journalists, and industry leaders would be there. If Lumina could get a spot to present, and if they could deliver a demo that truly impressed people, they might be able to turn things around. But there was a catch. This was not a normal conference. Companies did not just stand on stage and show slides. They had to perform. They had to put on a show. They had to make the audience feel something. And that was exactly where Lumina was weakest. Their product was smart. The technology was solid. But the demo was boring. It was just screens and data and charts. There was no emotion. No heart. No soul. Theo asked if anyone had ideas. The room stayed quiet. People looked at each other, hoping someone else would speak. But nobody had answers. Rohan felt his heart beating faster. A voice in his head whispered something. An idea. A crazy, terrifying idea. He pushed it away. No, that part of his life was over. He was not that person anymore. But as the meeting ended and people slowly left the room, Rohan stayed behind. He sat alone in the empty conference room, staring at the whiteboard covered in notes and failed strategies. And for the first time in 10 years, he thought about the piano. Not with fear, not with shame, but with something that felt almost like hope. He did not know it yet, but his life was about to change. The secret he had been hiding for so long was about to come out. And everything he thought he knew about himself was about to be tested. The question was simple. Could he face his past? Or would he let it destroy him all over again? The days after that meeting were heavy. The office felt different. People still came to work, but the energy had changed. There was less laughter in the hallways, fewer jokes during lunch breaks. Everyone was trying to stay positive, but deep down, they all knew the truth. Lumana was running out of time. Theo spent most of his days locked in his office, making phone calls and sending emails. He was trying to get Lumana a spot at the EdTech Innovation Summit. It was their last hope, and he was fighting for it with everything he had. Meanwhile, the rest of the team tried to focus on their work. But it was hard to concentrate when you knew your job might not exist in 6 weeks. Some people updated their resumes in secret. Others started reaching out to old contacts. Nobody talked about it openly. But everyone was preparing for the worst. Rohan watched all of this from his corner desk. He came to work every day, wrote his code, and went home. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, something was happening. That thought he had pushed away in the conference room kept coming back. It came to him during meetings. It came to him on the train ride home. It even came to him in his dreams. The piano. His secret. The person he used to be. Every night, Rohan would come home to his small apartment and see the piano sitting in the corner. It was covered with a white cloth now, like a ghost from his past. He had not lifted that cloth in years. He had not touched those keys since the night everything fell apart. But lately, he found himself standing near it. Just standing there, staring at the shape beneath the cloth. His fingers would twitch. His heart would race. And then he would turn away and tell himself to stop being foolish. That life was over. He was a developer now. A nobody. And that was fine. That was safe. 2 weeks passed. Then, one morning, Theo called another team meeting. But this time, his face looked different. There was a small spark in his tired eyes. A hint of something that might have been hope. He told them the news. Lumana had gotten a spot at the summit. They were in. The room erupted in cheers. People hugged each other. Someone even cried a little. It felt like a miracle. After so many rejections, so many closed doors, they finally had a chance. But Theo raised his hand to quiet everyone down. His expression turned serious again. Getting into the summit was only half the battle, he explained. Now came the hard part. They had 4 weeks to prepare a demo that would blow people away. And not just any demo. This summit was famous for its theatrical presentations. Companies did not just talk about their products. They performed. They told stories. They made the audience laugh and cry and feel something deep in their hearts. Last year, the winning company had brought a live orchestra on stage. The year before that, someone had used holograms and dancers. These were not normal tech presentations. These were shows. And Lumina had nothing. Theo asked the team to start brainstorming ideas. What could they do to make their demo stand out? How could they show the world that their music education app was special? People started throwing out suggestions. Someone said they could bring kids on stage to demonstrate the app. Another person suggested using virtual reality. Someone else mentioned hiring actors to perform a short play about a child learning music. But every idea had problems. Bringing kids on stage was risky and complicated. Virtual reality was expensive and could easily go wrong in a live setting. Hiring actors felt fake and disconnected from what Lumina actually did. The more they talked, the more frustrated everyone became. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt real. Rohan sat in the back of the room, silent as always. He listened to every idea. He watched his colleagues struggle. And that voice in his head grew louder with each passing minute. You know what they need, the voice said. You know exactly what would make this work. He tried to ignore it. He told himself it was not his place. He was just a developer. He fixed bugs. He did not belong on a stage in front of thousands of people. But the voice would not stop. After the meeting ended, Rohan went back to his desk. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting. He thought about the summit. He thought about the audience. He thought about what it would feel like to sit at a piano again, in front of all those people. The fear was still there. It never really went away. But now, there was something else mixed in with it. Something he had not felt in a very long time. It was the desire to play. That night, Rohan did something he had not done in 10 years. He went home, walked straight to the piano, and pulled off the white cloth. Dust floated in the air. The black wood gleamed under the soft light of his apartment. He sat down on the bench. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. But he placed his fingers on the keys anyway. And then, slowly, carefully, he began to play. The sound filled the room like water filling an empty glass. It was rough at first. His fingers were stiff. They had forgotten the shapes, the movements, the feelings. But as he kept playing, something began to unlock inside him. The music came back. Not all at once, but little by little. A melody here, a chord there, memories of songs he used to love. Pieces he had practiced for years until they became part of his soul. He played for an hour, then 2, then 3. By the time he stopped, his fingers were sore and his eyes were wet. But for the first time in a decade, he did not feel empty. He felt alive. The next few days were strange for Rohan. He went to work like normal, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept thinking about the summit, about the demo, about what he could do to help Dot at the office. The team was still struggling. They had tried a dozen different ideas for the presentation, but nothing was working. The demo felt flat. It felt like every other tech pitch they had seen 100 times before. Theo was getting desperate. He stayed late every night, rewriting scripts and redesigning slides. But no matter what he tried, something was missing. The heart was not there. One afternoon, Rohan overheard Theo talking to one of the designers. They were standing in the hallway, speaking in low voices. Theo sounded exhausted. We can show them the technology, Theo said. We can explain how the algorithm works. But that is not what wins at this summit. People do not invest in features. They invest in feelings. They need to feel the music. They need to understand why this matters. The designer nodded, but had no answer. Neither did anyone else. Rohan stood frozen near his desk, pretending to look at his computer screen. But his heart was pounding. He knew what Theo needed. He knew it because he had spent his whole life understanding the difference between playing notes and playing music. Notes were just sounds. Anyone could learn to press keys in the right order. But music was something more. Music was emotion translated into sound. It was joy and pain and love and loss, all wrapped up in melodies that could make strangers cry. That was what Lumana was supposed to teach. Not just how to play instruments, but how to feel through music. How to express the things that words could never capture. And Rohan knew, deep in his bones, that there was only one way to show that to an audience. Someone had to play. Someone had to sit at that piano and pour their soul into the keys. Someone had to make 2,000 people forget they were watching a tech demo and remember why music existed in the first place. He thought about it all night. He barely slept. By morning, he had made a decision. It was the scariest decision of his life. He was going to tell Theo the truth. He was going to reveal the secret he had been hiding for 10 years. And he was going to offer it to do the one thing that terrified him more than anything else in the world. He was going to play the piano on that stage. The only question now was whether he had the courage to actually do it. Rohan stood outside Theo's office for 15 minutes before he found the courage to knock. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. His palms were sweating. Every part of his body was telling him to turn around and walk away. But he did not walk away. He knocked. Theo looked up from his desk, surprised to see Rohan standing in the doorway. In 2 years of working together, Rohan had never once come to his office for a personal conversation. He was the quiet one, the invisible one, the guy who did his job and never asked for anything. "Come in," Theo said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Is everything okay?" Rohan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His legs felt weak as he sat down. He had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head, but now that he was here, the words seemed stuck somewhere deep in his chest. Theo waited patiently. He could tell something important was happening. The look on Rohan's face was unlike anything he had seen before. There was fear there, but also something else. something that looked almost like determination. Finally, Rohan spoke. His voice was quiet and unsteady, but he forced the words out anyway. I need to tell you something. Something I have never told anyone at this company. Theo leaned forward, listening carefully, and then Rohan told him everything. He told him about his childhood, growing up in a small town where his mother taught piano lessons in their living room. He told him about falling in love with music at the age of 5, spending hours at the keyboard while other kids played outside. He told him about the competitions he won, the teachers who called him a prodigy, the scholarship to one of the best music schools in America. And then he told him about the night that ended it all. The auditorium, the spotlight, the hundreds of faces watching him, the way his hands froze on the keys, the panic that swallowed him whole, the shame of walking off that stage and knowing that everyone had seen him fail. Theo listened without interrupting. His expression changed as the story unfolded. Surprise turned to understanding. Understanding turned to something that looked like compassion. When Rohan finished, the room was silent for a long moment. I had no idea, Theo said softly. You never said anything. Rohan shook his head. I tried to forget. I thought if I buried it deep enough, it would go away. But it never really did. It has been sitting inside me this whole time, like a wound that never healed. Theo nodded slowly. He understood wounds like that. He had his own, but Rohan was not finished. There was one more thing he needed to say. The hardest thing of all. He took a deep breath and looked Theo directly in the eyes. I want to help save this company. I want to play at the summit. Theo blinked. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. You want to play? On stage? In front of 2,000 people? Rohan nodded. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady now. I know it sounds crazy. I know I have not performed in 10 years. I know I might freeze up again and ruin everything. But I also know that what you need for that demo is not slides or actors or special effects. What you need is someone who can make people feel the music. Someone who can show them why this app matters. I think I can do that. If you give me a chance. Theo sat back in his chair, processing what he had just heard. It was a lot to take in. The quiet developer who had been sitting in the corner for 2 years was actually a classically trained pianist who had walked away from a brilliant career. And now he was offering to face his biggest fear to help save the company. It was either the bravest thing Theo had ever heard or the most reckless. Are you sure about this? Theo asked. This is not a small thing. If you freeze up on that stage, it could destroy our last chance. I know, Rohan said. Believe me, I know. But I've been hiding for 10 years. I have been running from this moment my whole life. And I am tired of running. I would rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. Theo studied him for a long moment. He saw the fear in Rohan's eyes, but he also saw something stronger. He saw a man who had finally decided to stop being afraid. Okay, Theo said at last. Let us do it. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Rohan's life. They rebuilt the entire demo around his performance. The plan was simple but powerful. Rohan would walk onto that stage alone. No slides, no fancy technology. Just him and a grand piano. He would play a piece that showed everything music could be. The emotion, the passion, the soul. And then, after he finished, Theo would come on stage and explain how Luminous technology was designed to teach exactly that. Not just notes and rhythms, but feeling, expression, the human side of music that made it meaningful. It was a bold plan. It depended entirely on Rohan delivering a performance that would move the audience. If he succeeded, it could change everything. If he failed, it would be a disaster. Every day after work, Rohan went home and practiced. He chose to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece he had tried to perform on the night his career ended. It felt right to face that demon directly. If he could conquer that piece, he could conquer anything, but the practicing was brutal. His fingers had lost their strength over the years. Passages that used to flow easily now felt clumsy and awkward. He made mistakes constantly. Some nights, he got so frustrated that he wanted to slam the piano lid shut and never touch it again. And then there was the fear. It came every time he imagined himself on that stage. The lights, the faces, the silence before the first note. His chest would tighten. His breath would get short. The old panic would start creeping back. But something was different this time. He was not facing it alone. Word spread quickly through the office. The quiet developer was secretly a pianist, and he was going to perform at the summit. People were shocked at first, then curious, then supportive in ways Rohan never expected. His colleagues started staying late to help with the demo. The designers rebuilt the presentation materials. The engineers made sure every piece of technology would work perfectly. Even the people who barely knew Rohan came by his desk to wish him luck or offer encouragement. One evening, a coworker named Priya stopped by his apartment with a box of homemade food. She said her grandmother always believed that good food gave people strength. She did not stay long, but the gesture meant more to Rohan than she would ever know. Another night, Theo himself showed up at Rohan's door. He did not say much. He just sat on the couch and listened while Rohan practiced. When Rohan finished a particularly difficult passage, Theo nodded and said, "That was beautiful." Then he left. These small moments of kindness gave Rohan something he had not had in years. A sense that he was not alone. A feeling that people believed in him, even when he struggled to believe in himself. The night before the summit, Rohan could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through the piece in his mind note by note. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there. But underneath it, there was something else now. There was hope. He thought about the kid he used to be. The one who fell in love with music before he understood what fear even meant. The one who played for hours just because it made him happy. That kid was still inside him somewhere. Buried deep, but not gone. Tomorrow, he would find out if that kid still had a voice. Tomorrow, he would walk onto the biggest stage of his life and face the moment that had broken him 10 years ago. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. The morning of the summit, Rohan woke up before sunrise. He had barely slept. His body was exhausted, but his mind would not stop racing. Today was the day. The day he had been preparing for. The day he had been dreading. The day that would decide everything. He got out of bed and walked to the piano. The apartment was quiet and dark. He sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys, but he did not play. He just sat there, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingertips. These keys had been his best friends once. Then they became his enemies. Now, he was not sure what they were. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. Just one more time. Give me one more chance. The conference center was massive. Thousands of people filled the halls, talking, networking, buzzing with excitement. The EdTech Innovation Summit was one of the biggest events in the industry, and the energy in the building was electric. Everywhere you looked, there were banners and screens and booths showcasing the latest innovations in education technology. But Rohan saw none of it. He was backstage, hidden in a small room with concrete walls and fluorescent lights. The rest of the Lumina team was with him. Theo stood nearby, checking his notes for the 100th time. The designers and engineers sat on folding chairs, nervously tapping their feet. Nobody spoke much. There was nothing left to say. They had prepared everything they could. Now it was up to Rohan. A stagehand came to the door and told them they had 15 minutes. Rohan felt his stomach drop. 15 minutes. That was nothing. That was forever. Theo walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. Rohan tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "Terrified," he admitted. "My hands will not stop shaking." Theo nodded. He did not offer empty reassurances. He did not tell Rohan that everything would be fine. Instead, he said something that Rohan would remember for the rest of his life. "You know what I realized?" Theo said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. You have already shown more courage than most people show in a lifetime. Whatever happens out there, I am proud of you." Rohan felt his eyes sting. He blinked quickly and nodded. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in me." Theo smiled. "You gave us a reason to believe." The stagehand returned. It was time. Rohan walked through the dark corridor that led to the stage. Each step felt heavy, like his legs were made of stone. He could hear the noise of the audience on the other side of the curtain. 2,000 people, investors, journalists, industry leaders, all waiting to see what Lumina had to offer. His heart was pounding so hard, he thought it might burst out of his chest. The old fear was back, stronger than ever. It wrapped around him like chains, pulling him down, telling him to run. This was a mistake. He was not ready. He would freeze again, just like before. He would humiliate himself in front of everyone. But then he thought about his team, the people who had stayed late to help him, the coworker who brought him food, Theo, who had listened to him practice without saying a word. They had all believed in him when he did not believe in himself. He could not let them down. He thought about the child he used to be, the little boy who played piano in his mother's living room, not for fame or money or applause, but simply because music made him happy. That boy was still inside him. Scared, yes, but still there. Still waiting for a chance to come back. The curtain opened. The spotlight hit his face, and Rohan walked onto the stage. The auditorium was enormous. Rows and rows of seats stretched back into the darkness. The stage lights were blinding, but he could sense the presence of all those people. 2,000 pairs of eyes watching him. Waiting. In the center of the stage stood a grand piano, black and beautiful, gleaming under the lights. Rohan walked toward it slowly. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He sat down on the bench. The leather was cool against his legs. He looked at the keys, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. This was it. The moment he had been running from for 10 years. His hands were trembling. His breath was shallow. The fear was screaming at him to get up and leave. But he did not leave. He placed his fingers on the keys, and then something strange happened. He thought about his mother. She had passed away 5 years ago, before he ever had the chance to tell her how sorry he was for giving up on music. She had never blamed him. She had never pushed him. She had simply told him once that music was not something you did. It was something you were. He thought about all the children who would use Lumina's app. Kids from small towns and big cities. Kids who could not afford expensive lessons. Kids who just wanted to learn how to express themselves through sound. This performance was for them too. He closed his eyes. He took one deep breath, and he began to play the first notes of Chopin's Ballade. No, one floated into the air, soft, gentle, like a whisper. The audience went completely still. No one moved. No one breathed. Rohan kept his eyes closed. He did not think about the crowd. He did not think about the investors or the cameras or the fear. He thought only about the music. He let it flow through him like water through a river. He let it carry him somewhere far away, somewhere safe, somewhere that felt like home. The peace grew more intense. His fingers danced across the keys, faster and more powerful. The melody swelled and soared, filling every corner of the massive auditorium. There was joy in the music. There was pain. There was longing and loss and hope and love. Everything Rohan had felt in the past 10 years poured out of him and into the piano. He was not performing anymore. He was confessing. He was telling his story without words. And the audience heard it. They felt it. Somewhere in the middle of the piece, the fear disappeared. It did not fade slowly. It just vanished, like a shadow when you turn on the light. In its place, there was only the music, pure and beautiful and free. Rohan played like he had never played before, not even in his best days at music school, because this time, he was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to prove anything. He was simply being himself, the truest version of himself, the person he had buried for so long. The final notes rang out, soft and delicate, like the last light of a sunset. Then silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The auditorium was completely quiet. Rohan sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys, his heart pounding in his chest. And then the applause began. It started slowly, like raindrops before a storm. A few people clapping. Then more. Then more. And suddenly, the entire auditorium was on its feet. 2,000 people, standing and clapping and cheering. The sound was deafening. It washed over Rohan like a wave, warm and overwhelming. He opened his eyes and looked out at the crowd. There were tears on some faces. Others were smiling so wide it looked like their cheeks might break. People were not just clapping. They were moved, truly moved. The applause lasted for 4 full minutes. Rohan stood up from the bench and bowed, his legs shaking beneath him. He did not trust himself to speak. He was not sure he could even form words. Then Theo walked onto the stage, microphone in hand. He stood beside Rohan and faced the audience. "What you just witnessed," Theo said, his voice thick with emotion, "is exactly what we are trying to teach with Lumina. Not just notes, not just technique, but this, the ability to make people feel, the ability to express the deepest parts of yourself through music. That is what our technology is designed to unlock in every child." The audience listened in silence. They understood now. This was not just a tech demo. This was a vision, a dream, a belief that music could change lives. And they believed it too. The hours after the performance were a blur. Rohan remembered flashes of it. People shaking his hand. Business cards being pushed into his palm. Cameras flashing. Voices asking questions. But most of it felt like a dream, like he was floating outside his own body, watching everything happen to someone else. The team gathered in a hotel room that night. Someone had ordered pizza. Someone else had brought champagne. But nobody was eating or drinking much. They were all too busy staring at their phones, watching the numbers climb. Someone in the audience had recorded Rohan's performance and posted it online. Within 3 hours, it had been viewed 50,000 times. By midnight, it crossed 500,000. By morning, it was everywhere. The video spread like wildfire. News sites picked it up. Tech blogs wrote about it. People shared it on social media with comments like, "This made me cry at my desk," and "I've watched this 12 times and I still get chills." The story behind the performance only made it more powerful. A developer who had hidden his talent for 10 years. A dying startup with one last chance. A man facing his greatest fear in front of thousands of strangers. It was the kind of story people needed to hear. A reminder that it was never too late to be who you were meant to be. The investors came quickly after that. Before the summit had even ended, Theo had received calls from 3 different venture capital firms. They did not just want to talk. They wanted to invest. They had seen the video. They had felt the emotion in that room. And they understood, perhaps for the first time, What Lumana was really trying to do. Within 2 weeks, the company closed a $12 million funding round. It was more money than they had ever dreamed of. Enough to hire new people. Enough to improve the product. Enough to reach millions of children around the world. The office transformed overnight. The tired, hopeless atmosphere was gone. In its place was energy and excitement and possibility. People smiled again. They laughed again. They believed again. But for Rohan, the real change was not about the money or the success or the viral video. The real change was something much deeper. Something that happened inside him, in a place that no one else could see. The morning after the summit, Rohan woke up in his apartment and did something he had not done in 10 years. He walked to his piano, sat down, and played. Not because he had to. Not because a company was depending on him. But simply because he wanted to. The music flowed out of him easily, naturally, like breathing. He played pieces he had loved as a child. He played songs he had written himself but never shared with anyone. He played for an hour, then 2, then 3. And when he finally stopped, he realized something that brought tears to his eyes. The fear was gone. Not completely, of course. Fear never disappears entirely. It would probably always be there, lurking in the background, waiting for moments of weakness. But it no longer controlled him. It no longer had the power to silence him. He had faced it on that stage, in front of 2,000 people, and he had won. For the first time in a decade, music was not his trauma. It was his gift again. The weeks that followed were full of changes. Theo offered Rohan a new position at the company. He would no longer be just a back-end developer. He would become the chief creative officer, responsible for shaping the emotional and artistic direction of Lumana's products. It was a role that combined everything he was. The technical skills he had built over the years. The musical knowledge he had carried since childhood. The understanding of what it meant to struggle and fail and find your way back. Rohan accepted. It felt right. Like he had finally found the place where all the pieces of his life fit together. But the job was only part of it. The bigger change was in how he saw himself. For 10 years, Rohan had defined himself by his failure. He was the man who froze on stage. The promising musician who crumbled under pressure. The person who ran away instead of fighting back. That story had shaped everything he did. It had kept him small. It had kept him hidden. It had kept him afraid. Now, he was writing a new story. One where failure was not the ending, but the middle. One where the worst moment of his life became the foundation for the best. One where he was not a victim of his past, but a survivor who had turned his pain into purpose. He started sharing his story publicly. At first, it was just interviews about the summit performance. But soon, he began speaking at schools and community centers, talking to young people about fear and failure and the courage to try again. He told them about the night he walked off that stage 10 years ago. He told them about the years of hiding and shame. And he told them about the moment he decided to stop running. The message was simple. Everyone fails. Everyone gets scared. But the people who succeed are not the ones who never fall down. They are the ones who get back up. The video of his summit performance eventually reached over 20 million views. It was shared in music schools and therapy offices and corporate training sessions. People wrote to him from all over the world, telling him how his story had inspired them to face their own fears. A woman in Brazil said she finally went back to painting after 15 years. A teenager in India said he auditioned for his school play, even though he was terrified. A man in Canada said he apologized to his father after not speaking to him for a decade. Rohan read every message. Each one reminded him that his pain had not been wasted. It had become a bridge that connected him to strangers who understood what it meant to be broken and to heal. One evening, about 3 months after the summit, Rohan went back to the auditorium where he had failed 10 years ago. The music school had invited him to give a special performance. A full circle moment, they called it. He almost said no. The idea of returning to that place, standing on that same stage, brought back all the old feelings. The shame, the humiliation, the memory of walking away while hundreds of people watched. But he said yes, because he understood now that healing was not about avoiding the places that hurt you. It was about returning to them with a stronger heart. The night of the performance, Rohan stood backstage in the same corridor he had walked down as a 21-year-old student. The same walls, the same lights, the same silence before the storm. But he was not the same person. He walked onto the stage, sat down at the piano, and looked out at the audience. There were faces he recognized. Old teachers, former classmates, and in the front row, the entire Lumina team, including Theo, who had flown across the country just to be there. Rohan smiled. Then he placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The music that filled the auditorium that night was different from anything he had played before. It was not perfect. It was not flawless. But it was real. It was honest. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, found himself in the darkness, and climbed back into the light. When he finished, the applause was not as loud as it had been at the summit. But it meant more. Because this time, it was not about saving a company or impressing investors. It was about something far more important. It was about coming home. Rohan stood up from the piano and bowed. And as he looked out at the audience, he made a silent promise to himself. He would never stop playing. He would never stop sharing his gift. And he would never, ever let fear steal his voice again. He had spent 10 years as a ghost, hiding from who he really was. Now, finally, he was alive.